And yet I find that I've somehow found one of my families by being here. We've learned in our time together here that context is an extremely important part of what we do. It's inextricably linked, it's connected. Nothing happens out of context. And in a way, I've been a fish out of water somewhat in my work. And as I describe it to you, I think you'll understand. So being here has actually helped me find the context that I've been part of but didn't know I was part of. So that's actually thrilling, and it brings great support and clarity. So I wanted to begin a little bit, speaking of context, to speak about how I began my work. I was born just after World War II, and I think it was very much still in the atmosphere. I was born in the United States, and that was at the end of it. It was the culmination of two great world wars. That, as His Holiness spoke of earlier today, many people lost their lives. Great destruction, and I think it had a tremendous effect on our consciousness. So not only did it culminate with the explosion of nuclear bombs and the devastation that created, but I think it actually rippled into the way we think and what we feel. And I think it's still rippling somehow. And I think as I grew up, I'm the same age as Arthur. I don't have the shiny part, but I'm sure that'll come. But as I grew up, I was living in an environment that was in the aftermath of that explosion and that devastation. And I think the part of the impact of that was we began to see tremendous amounts of social and political upheaval worldwide, but certainly in the West and certainly in the United States. And that also was religious. Religious institutions began to go into a kind of a disorientation. Some of the things that we thought were going to get us where we were trying to get seemed to fail us. And institutionalized everything was being called into question. The boundaries began to dissipate. It's almost as if once we exploded that bomb, we realized that we were capable of doing anything. And it's as if nothing mattered anymore on a certain level. So experimentation was abounding, disintegration was happening. There was a trek to the east, just to echo our last presenter. There was something that brought us to the east, I think. In fact, that happened even earlier in the 20th century. As we were looking for sanity, I think, solutions, sanity. Basic things about how can we become better at being human beings? How can we find that warm-heartedness that His Holiness talks about, that we know we're capable of, but in an unregulated world, it seems impossible to find. So that was the world I grew up in. And my family was an echo of that, since they were in that world. And one of the characteristics, may I have some of that water?
Yeah,
Somebody's?
I think it was.
It was for me.
It's shared.
It's group
it's
water.
Part of the community.
Was this unbounded materialism.
Yeah.
So it's as if since we weren't quite capable of solving the problems internally, we sort of filled the gap with materialism, television, movies, acquisitiveness. It's a very wonderful English word, meaning the acquiring of more and more and more and more and more. And I think that was the basic atmosphere of my upbringing. And inwardly, there I was, this young kid who loved music, passionately felt everything. So everything seemed to register. And I didn't have a lot of capacity to stop the registration. I didn't want to. I felt. So I think the rippling from the explosions that ended World War II and just the chaos that was in our culture was something that I felt deeply. And also that extreme materialism was something that in the middle class that I lived in, or upwardly mobile America, was having an effect inwardly. And I keep pointing this way because it set up an experimental part of me that lives until this day and is really at the center of my work, which I'll speak about shortly. But that disconnect between what I was observing and experiencing in the world and this deep sense of longing for sanity, that's the only word I can use, and knowing that there was something of meaning, something of purpose that was not being fulfilled. The disconnect was so strong for me, and it was actually quite painful and confusing and disorienting. So I would go to the piano. I liked when Arthur talked about Einstein going to the piano. I fancy myself playing Bach in the morning, and it brought some sense of order to my life, and it also gave me a mode of expression. Early in my life, though a musician, I recognized also that there was something more I needed to do in this world that had more to do with human development. I didn't quite know the term human development, but I was trying to understand how things worked, how I worked, and how the world worked, but how I worked and what would grow me. And I was quite aware, even when I was 9 and 10 years old, of a tendency to throw myself into experience to learn. I just didn't do very well with books. I didn't do very well with taxonomies. I just didn't. I was into experience, and I needed to jump into life and do. Well, I'm going to fast forward now, really a big leap, because by the time I was in my late 20s, I had managed somehow or another to become the dean of a music college. And you all know what a music college is. It's where you study music seriously to have a career as a professional musician, and you could become a great pianist or a great composer or a great violinist or whatever. And I found myself the dean of this wonderful music college, the second oldest college in the United States, very serious. And a conservatory of music has the job of conserving traditions. That's its job. And at the same time, it's about the creation of new music. So it has this twin task of conserving traditions and also creating something new. And along that time in my life, while at the conservatory, I became very interested in how students learned. And though, of course, I loved music, the human development part of me actually was kicking in and coming into the foreground. And I became very, very interested in what I was seeing and how the students learned. And in particular, I could see that there was one group of students who were very skilled at playing very quickly on the piano, and they had great advantage as children. They studied music, they studied all of the scales and arpeggios, this is fancy language, and they were going 200 miles an hour on the piano, and they were dazzling, and they were utterly mechanical, and they were dead musically. It was this very curious paradox for me. Technically brilliant, musically dead. Then there was this other group of students who would come, and those students were passionate music makers, passionate. But they had no technical capacity whatsoever, but passionate. And one thing I observed about those students was they could take risks and make musical solutions to musical problems that none of the technically excellent students would ever think to do. Now that really interested me. They would end a musical phrase in a way that I would never imagine, nor would any of the trained musicians ever imagine. And I thought to myself, that's the kind of thinking, that's the kind of problem solving, that's the kind of creativity that we're going to need if we are going to find our way to a better world. If we keep repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating without that leap into the unknown, into something new, we perhaps will stay in the same terrible situation that created the explosions at the end of World War II. So that became my question, and that became the foundation of an inquiry. And then I came east on a journey, and while I was here in the east, I found myself in a cave. This is actually a true story. And I was sitting in a cave, and I got lost, disconnected from the group with whom I traveled. And as I sat there, I had the thought, I know what I will do with the rest of my life. And I was then 30. And I said, I am going to create a whole school of education that's built on that basic insight, that basic understanding about how to teach in such a way that we don't lose the originality, the possibility for something new to come. And I came back to the United States, and within 3 months, I met probably one or two of the most important musicians in Western culture and Western civilization of the 20th century, a very amazing man called Leonard Bernstein, who was a conductor and a composer, and he wrote many famous pieces, operas and symphonies and Broadway shows, and many, many different things. But he was also an educator, a very deeply committed educator. And so I met my mentor. And I remember when I met him, I was sitting with him on the roof of an apartment on West End Avenue in Manhattan, in New York City. And there we sat together. And the dinner was for me to meet Bernstein and another very famous composer named Aaron Copland, which for me was, my God, it was heaven. And so there I sat. And when I met Bernstein, I came in with these papers, all of what we used to call the dot matrix printer printouts from my computer, early computers, and reams of paper, and I'm pulling them out, and I'm like our scientists have been showing us how everything works. I was showing him how my educational methods worked and where they led people and why it mattered, and he sat there looking at me, and at a certain point he said, well, I think we're going to have to spend a lot of time together. And we did. And for the next 10 years until he died, I spent those 10 years with him. And we co-conceived what is the Academy for the Love of Learning, the organization I'm going to speak a little bit about now. So I think with that I'm going to put on the first slide, and I will confess to you.
So could you just say a little more about all the layers of meaning, and I think we're going to have to spend a lot of time together.
What did that mean?
What he meant by it, yeah.
Oh, God.
You could read it a lot of different ways.
Well, maybe the best way to say it thank you, Diana. The person who introduced us, the head of our doctoral program at the conservatory, through a gentleman introduced us. And the gentleman said, there's one person who I think you should meet in all of the world of music, because your words could be coming out of his mouth.
Got it. So he recognized his alter ego.
And so it's about recognitions, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened.
Thank you.
Bernstein said, oh my God, I see what you're trying to do, but wait a minute, what do you mean about experience? And you have to,
Right.
So then the battle began between the two of us, and it went on for a decade. And so what I'd like to just say is, at the end of Bernstein's life, his final questions, actually, when he died, he fell to his knees. I was with him through his death process, through the night. Actually, he died in the morning, and the night before he died, we had a very profound conversation about the Academy and about many things. But when he actually died, he actually was given a shot of gamma globin, particularly needed it, and he fell to his knees, and he looked up and he said, "What is it?" And that was the end of his life. Now, he was always living in the question. Wonder was always at the edge of his existence, at the edge of his life, and I feel that's true of myself. And as he approached the end of his life, his main question was, you ready? Pay attention to the slide. I hope I can do this. This is my first slide presentation. I want everyone to know. My first. And it's not working.
Thank goodness we have
Ned, what do I do? Slideshow. From. Oh, bless your heart, Ned. Okay.
Great.
So at the end of Bernstein's life, his question was, don't we never learn? In other words, can we learn? And in particular, can we be transformed? Can those of us who brought ourselves, all of us, to the brink of complete destruction at the end of World War II, and who are now, we're walking ourselves back now, the brilliant scientists who are here with us, all of us are sitting here asking, can we be transformed? How do we become transformed? Can we become the kinds of human beings that we imagine ourselves possible to become? How do we do that? What are the methods? What are the techniques? How can we measure them? How can we become the human beings that we aspire to? So that was Bernstein's question at the end of his life. And I was 39, almost 40 years old by then, and I had been in a deep exploration of transformative learning. It's a whole field called transformational learning, imagine. And transpersonal psychology, forms of psychology that have been reoriented so that they can be used to learn about who we are as human beings, not only for rehabilitative purposes, but habilitative purposes. So I said, well, of course we can learn. We can be transformed. And I know this from my own personal experience because as a child, confused by the outer world, recognizing that there was something else that the world was not teaching me, I became very active in my own inner subjective exploration, trying to understand what's the impact on me of this? What is the impact on the world when I do that? So I had a very active internal learning laboratory going on inside. And lived experience, as I mentioned earlier, was the primary, the dominant for me, the dominant interest. It's what I believed in. The lists, though I understand their significance and how important they are, the taxonomies, they become almost prescriptive. They almost can stand outside of us. And for me, the dominant interest and the driving force in my life was throwing myself into experience and being changed and grown by the experience. And that's what interested me most. So that question became, don't we never learn? And my response, well, of course we can learn. We can transform. I still think that's true.
Okay.
I know I can. I am absolutely certain of that. And I generalize from that we can. Has now become,
I think you got
oh,
it.
thank you, Diana. Has now become,
Thanks. Good
you
catch.
can see it better there, a whole academy, an academy for the love of learning, a beautiful campus with lots of beautiful buildings and land, a very deeply sacred place, some people call a post-religion place, where we're exploring transformative learning and how it works, how it changes us, the impact it has on us, the impact we have as we go through transformative learning experience, as we meet each other and as we meet the world. So it's a living, breathing representation of learning deeply through experience. Okay. So I wanted to bring some images of some of what happens inside that building. and some of the things that we're learning. And I want to refer to Sonu, when you spoke this morning and you brought the image at the very end of that beautiful chart about, how did you call it, what was the word, bottom left? Not experimental. So we're highly experimental, but we're not experimental yet. So we are now just at the point, we're at the very beginning of the notion of measuring what we do, exploring impact, and finding the places that scientists will be able to help shape the understanding of the meaning of what we're doing. But what we're learning and seeing is that everything happens through relationship. It's either relationship to the objects that we're exploring or the relationships that we have with each other. And we feel very deeply that with the right context and the right condition, what we're seeing is, if you remember when His Holiness spoke, I believe it was yesterday morning, that as the mind quiets, when we were talking about the different minds, that when the gross mind begins to relax and the conflict that is in the gross mind and the intensity of thought and afflictive emotion that might be living there begins to ameliorate or reduce and becomes quieted, a subtle mind begins to arise and emerge. And what we're finding in our work is that's what I think we're seeing. That's what we think we're seeing. And what happens is it gives rise to what we call a learning field. And the topic being explored is one, I think you gave part of my presentation this morning when you spoke about process and content. So the content being explored, whatever that might be, is one domain. The other domain is the way it's happening and the human engagement that's happening with the people through relationship. And what we're finding in this learning field, and we've developed a very rich language for that, which I won't be able to go into here, is that if the context is set properly, that the engagement between people, when bumps in the road happen, when afflictive emotions arise in the face of each other through real experience, and we navigate through those afflictive emotions, those challenging moments, then something else happens and a field of wisdom emerges among people, and we can deepen our inquiry into a topic together collectively. It's quite an astonishing thing, and I think as we look at what's happening and our scientist friends help us find ways to measure that and understand the meaning of that, we will find it to be a very important phenomenon. Another thing I'd like to share with you, which will probably look very foreign to our friends here, is we work very much in partners, and we work very much with somatic experience. We've learned that the mind, the brain, the thinking mind, is full of delusions and memories and all kinds of things that can trick us. And so we try to find ways to enter into experience somatically, because we have some sense that the body doesn't lie, and sometimes the mind can, or the brain can. So we are exploring many different modalities of experience as we do our work. Meaning making, finding purpose together in groups is something that we find ourselves doing often. Here you're looking at some of the beautiful spaces that we have in the building for our classrooms. This is a group of teachers who teach in the public schools in the Santa Fe public school system. And we bring mindfulness and contemplative practice into our work, and they're all experiencing and exploring the quieting of the mind, and they're coming forth with meaning and purpose where really they've lost contact with that in their lives. So I'd like to share with you, as I come to a close here, the basic learning practice that we work with is, if you think back to the story I told you about these conservatory students, one of the things that we feel strongly about in our work at the Academy is that we must produce the opportunity for experience, lived experience, as the basic modality for learning. However, we also recognize that existing theory, the taxonomies, the lists, the prior knowledge that has been explored and developed and put into written form is also extremely important in the process of critical inquiry. So we begin with experience, and then as you can see at the very bottom of the circle, we move to existing theory to inform experience. And in a way, this is the reverse of the way education happens currently in our schools and educational system in the United States. Our main goal is to place this learning as a practice at the center of everybody's life as we walk through life, that we live with a fluidity. We're always growing and learning ourselves with great intention and capacity. And of course, going to what other people have written about and studied about the same topic so that we can inform our experience without it becoming prescriptive and our becoming identified with the theory rather than the lived experience, as Matthew Ricard spoke about yesterday. Okay. So, we are at the end of our 5th day, and I'm going to take this moment to take a deep breath. And as Sona did, express my deep gratitude to my colleagues, my new family, and bring us to a final question. My last slide. And it's a question that I put to everyone here. As Tibetan Buddhism incorporates the view of Western science, how can we all take care that the concepts, the taxonomies, the theories, somehow are not mistaken for the lived experience? It's a very important question. And what I propose is that we keep coming back to this touchstone. Are we more warm-hearted? Are we happier? Is there more human flourishing? Is it helping us in that way? Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow. So we knew we'd have a lot of rich ideas to think about from these three very different and yet in some ways very similar and very creative gentlemen. We have 15 minutes. And because of the peculiarities of the scheduling and whatnot, it's difficult to orchestrate a real conversation among the panelists because some of them heard each other and some of them didn't. But Jim, you were the one who heard your two colleagues. So I wonder if you have questions, any questions or kind of thoughts now having heard them that you'd like to share, and then we'll go on and then invite other members of our traveling roadshow if they have questions or comments. Does that one work?
This one is working.
We've worn out all the microphones. We've worn out all the batteries. Here we go.
Well, I would just like to comment. I mean, I think
Beautiful.
the desire is the same in the sense that we all recognize that there's an inner life that needs nurturing, and the nurturing of that inner life allows us to flourish. And within that, I think, as you point out, and I think in the context of what others have said, it is understanding our interconnectedness and also understanding how to come to a place where we can freely give of ourselves and give love and share that experience. And I think one of the difficulties in modern society that inhibits us is fear. And it's really, whether it's in the context of learning how to love learning, or in the context of just learning how to love another unconditionally, I think that's the challenge for all of us. You know, it's interesting people say, what's it like to meet the Dalai Lama? And one of the comments I make, you know, I'm at Stanford, and places like Stanford are highly competitive, and they can sometimes be ruthless. What happens to a lot of people is that you end up putting on a body of armor. When you interact with someone, you're carrying this thing that tries to protect you and show that you're not vulnerable, that says, I have my act together, you know, I know what's going on, I'm successful, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a psychic cost to carrying that mask, if you will, or that shield. And what I find fascinating is that when you're able to let that down a bit and show your vulnerability, it actually results in people embracing you. And the wonderful thing about interacting with someone like His Holiness, or if you will, another enlightened soul, and I'm not saying I'm an enlightened soul, I'm saying if I meet someone like him, is that suddenly you feel as if you're embraced by love and you don't have to carry this burden anymore. And it's an incredible, incredible feeling. And I think that that is what we want to strive for, and that is what really makes us authentic human beings.
So, how about we have this group of empirical scientists over here. We have programs that are emerging, that are hoping, that are an interesting sort of play on the word experimental. Programs that are experimental, but certainly not in the sense that you meant in your taxonomy of threats to validity. And so, how do we think about bringing these two worlds together? Carol, yeah.
Great question.
My world is the world of the National Institutes of Health and of basic science,
Right.
and then also applied biosocial sciences.
Right.
So when I joined a foundation that was dedicated to not only physical health of adolescents, but also their mental health, I encountered a number of educators. And I was shocked because I believed that there was an equivalent for education that we had for medicine,
Right.
which is there would be a National Institutes of Education that funds basic research, systematic research into what leads to quality educational outcomes for children. Why, you know, I just thought it was there. And I was shocked to discover that this did not exist.
Yeah.
This means that we attend to the bodies of the members of our societies, and we do not attend to their minds in a way that would, through developmental, fostering developmental processes,
That's right.
lead to both positive mental and physical outcomes. So I'm bringing this to the conversation because if we want to advance the sorts of visions that we've been hearing from our speakers in this session, we need to develop, we need to work for a science for the study of education. And by that I don't mean turning study of education into a science of the kind that reductionists like me might do, but we need to advocate for and develop institutions for the advancement of effective, established approaches to education. So,
Right, that's a very important point, I think. So we've heard His Holiness say over and over that, including this morning, that we need to bring this new thinking out into the field of education, and will improve society if we do it well. And we will do it well if we bring this hard-won scientific knowledge that we have talked about for the first 4 days. So it's really science it's bringing science as an input into education, but the question of the science of learning is missing, and it's missing. It's been isolated in schools of education that don't show slides like the one Sono showed that the literature in that field is so far behind the literature
Yeah.
in the biomedical field. So, that's a dirty little secret we carry, I think, and one that we need to go back and think about as the Mind and Life Institute moves into this new area with this enthusiasm for science, but without much of a foundation to stand on.
Yeah, Diane, if I might just add to that, as one who's traveled a lot in the exploration of traditional education, public school education, at least in the United States, many teachers report that in their formal education, they do not study anything about the developmental stages of childhood
Right.
and the developmental tasks of childhood. And most teachers will report that the time they spend in so-called colleagueship is spent actually learning about how to be more successful at teaching to the tests, as they like to say.
Yeah.
And the way the public schools are set up in the United States are such that it's a generalization, but it's pretty accurate. There are some exceptions, but the dominant is the doors open, the children, let's say an 8th grade student, the doors open, child walks in, sits down at a desk, the bell rings, the children are all sitting there, the class begins, 48 minutes later, the bell rings, the doors open, the children move. It's like what I'm doing with my hands. It's an industrial model.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly how it's set up. And the cross-pollination, the richness that we've experienced here, the learning field, as we call it in my organization, there's no place for it. There's no space for it. There's no opportunity. There's no value. And so, of course, there's a lot of fear, unfortunately, because teachers have certain curriculum goals that they have to reach. It's this. And it's very hard to change that with the mind that created it. It continues to do its thing.
Right.
And yet I just will add that there are many beautiful, Steiner's work in the developmental stages of the child, it's profound what we understand, at least from that model, and there are other models about how children grow.
Right. Any thoughts on that question about how we advance the research on this work?
I'm not sure about how this can be advanced in research. Obviously, more programs, if we can bring into the schools. One of the challenges that we face in bringing this kind of program in schools, it's not just whether the schools are open to incorporating these programs, because it's perceived kind of religious affiliation and so forth. But I think that right now, at least in the United States, most of the public schools, because there is a certain standard kind of education. I mean, you have to. It's based on, quite heavily on standardized tests. You have to have the grades. It's driven by what kind of grades you get. I mean, I find that with my students, even with the college students, and the courses when I offer in this field like this, that I offer a course in Buddhist meditations. Actually, just started in a couple of years ago, and the number one concern that most of the students have is actually that what kind of grade they're going to get it.
Right.
That's what is. So I think that is itself a somewhat kind of challenge. At the system, education system as itself, driven by this kind of the grades that you have to performance as a grade. I think that another way of evaluating like the emotional intelligence, social intelligence, this sort of the more, it's happening, but it's not happening yet. So that's why I think we need more of the research, as His Holiness that I quoted. I think that there needs to be more research, more scientific findings, and if you have scientific findings, it's easier to convince. I just one note, then I will stop here. But when I in 2005, when we started this CBCD, cognitive-based compassion training research, with the undergraduates, the first year's college students, and I was teaching them this meditation. And the first time I taught, even though the students were self-select, they volunteered, and then we just put it in 2 groups. But I noticed that there was a certain kind of, lack of interest. So next class, what I did was that I brought an article from Time magazine, and it was an article on meditation. It said, how to get smarter, one breath at a time. And obviously it's a pun on the mindfulness of breathing meditation. But it reported that a study where after a few weeks of mindfulness of breathing meditation, that a certain part of the brain that is associated with memory actually got thicker. So therefore, that implication is that your memory gets better, and then if you have better memory, of course you learn, you will learn better. So therefore, you will get smarter. And that was an instant kind of the, attraction for the students. And then the next day you see that they are actually more interested in it. So I think that more scientific evidence is very much needed.
Rajesh? Working.
So, as someone who's neither a Tibetan nor a Westerner, so I might even be a minority of one here right now. But something that strikes me as what's interesting in this circle is that instead of thinking about it as science meets Buddhism, it might be more relevant to think about it as 2 different kinds of virtues that are sort of interacting with each other. Right? So some of these are hard virtues, which are actually shared in both traditions, like rationality, rigor, intellectual precision. Many of those have been mentioned by His Holiness. But also there are certain soft virtues, right? So compassion, fluidity, creative imagination. So instead of thinking about it as how can science meet Buddhism or Buddhism inform it, can we just sort of think about it in more humanistic terms as how can we sort of cultivate enough range of virtues that makes everybody a fuller person?
Thank you. Tanya, did you want to?
Just why do you call some hard and others soft? What makes compassion softer than intellect? The brain bases beyond both are rather
We could call
half
them,
soft, half...
we could call them gross and subtle.
I think that's also a danger. In the West, there has been long time somehow a bias that, like memory and cognition is something more important and more biologically based than is compassion and things like that. And so they have been degraded and not taken seriously. So I think it's very important to make the claim that actually they are all on the same level of hardness or softness, or that they are basically, they are all, part of being accessible to intellect and also to feelings,
right?
and they have all biological basis and can be all experimentally investigated in the same way, on the same level.
Especially if you
I'm just going to put on my embodied cognition hat and say that we associate some of these with harder or soft